If you were to stand on the surface of the moon and look back across the dark, silent void of space, you would see a sight that defies almost everything we know about how planets are supposed to form. You would see a brilliant sapphire sphere, wrapped in swirling white clouds, gleaming against the endless black backdrop. From the void, Earth's vivid surface appears welcoming, but this beauty masks a deeper paradox. It looks like a jewel, but to a cosmologist, Earth's water is not mere artistry. It is a contradiction written into the laws of planetary physics. It is a problem. It is a paradox. By all the laws of physics and planetary formation, that water shouldn't be there. Despite its proximity to a furnace-like star, Earth supports vast oceans that contradict every expectation of inner solar system dryness. Yet we orbit a star that is a nuclear furnace. We exist in a zone of the solar system where heat should have boiled every drop of moisture away billions of years ago. By every standard of early solar physics, Earth should resemble its lifeless neighbors, but does not. As barren as Mercury or as dusty as Mars. Instead, oceans are drowning us. This water is the defining feature of our world, the cradle of our biology, and the solvent of our existence. But its origin is one of the deepest, most contested mysteries in science. Did it fall from the sky in a rain of comets? Did it bleed from the rocks themselves? Or is it a ghost from an era before Earth existed at all? We trace the ocean's origins tonight. We will discover the hidden history of the water in your glass by traveling back to the era of fire and heavy rains. Therefore, if you truly enjoy what I do here, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Let's ease into tonight's journey together by lowering the lights and possibly turning on a fan for a gentle background hum. We must first examine our neighbors in order to comprehend why our oceans are so mysterious. The inner solar system is a neighborhood of rock and fire. The nearest planet to the Sun, Mercury, is an airless, blistered world of stone and iron that has been baked by sunlight. Venus, our twin in size, is a hellscape of crushing atmospheric pressure and runaway greenhouse heat, where any water that might have existed boiled off into space eons ago. Mars, the red planet, is a frozen desert, a place where water exists only as ice, trapped in the polar caps, or buried deep underground, a fossil of a wetter past. And then, there is Earth. As far as we are aware, we are the only planet in the universe where water exists in all three states at the same time as ice, vapor, and most importantly, liquid. We are a water world, in a region of space that is fiercely hostile to water. The sheer proportion of liquid water on Earth challenges models of early planetary heat and volatility. There are over 1.3 billion cubic kilometers of water on our surface. It saturates the atmosphere, creates canyons, fills basins 5 miles deep, and permeates every living thing's veins. The conventional theory of planet formation is contradicted by this abundance. In the protoplanetary disk, near the young Sun, was dominated by heat and volatility, inimical to volatile condensation, of dust and gas from which the solar system formed. The area close to the young Sun was simply too hot for water to condense. The solar wind should have vaporized it and carried it outward to the system's boundaries. The Earth formed in this dry zone. It originated under a hot star in a dry place from dry rocks. Therefore, large-scale surface oceans are not predicted by standard inner solar system formation models. It is an alien substance that has somehow found a home where it doesn't belong. We must examine the invisible line that separates our solar system in order to determine how it arrived. Astronomers have mapped an invisible boundary in space, a thermal border known as the frost line or the snow line. It works on the same principle as a campfire on a cold night. Close to the fire, it is too hot for snow to exist. water can only exist as steam or vapor. But if you walk far enough away into the darkness, you cross a threshold where the temperature drops low enough for water to freeze into solid ice. In the early solar system, this line was located roughly somewhere between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. The dry zone is where Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars formed, along with everything else inside this line. Here, the intense heat of the young sun vaporized any volatile compounds like water. Our planet was formed from clumps of rocky metallic dust grains that had been dehydrated. However, water was plentiful beyond the line, in the frigid regions where the gas giants reside. Large reservoirs of comets and icy moons were created when it froze into hard, rock-like crystals of ice. According to the laws of planetary formation, the Earth sits on the wrong side of the fence. Although we are covered in the ice of the outer system, we are constructed from the dry dust of the inner system. The birth of our planet was not a gentle accumulation of matter. It was a violent, chaotic demolition derby. The Earth expanded by accretion 4.5 billion years ago. Numerous rocks, planetesimals, and asteroids collided with one another, their gravitational pull creating an expanding sphere. Each one of these collisions released a tremendous amount of kinetic energy, which was instantly converted into heat. The young Earth was molten, not just hot. In this forge of creation, even if there had been traces of water trapped inside the original rocks, the intense heat of accretion would likely have boiled it away. It would have outgassed, rising as steam and stripped away by the fierce solar wind of the newborn sun, which was far more active and violent than the star we know today. According to the Standard Model, the early Earth was a sterile ball of magma orbiting in a cloud of dust, a bone-dry rock. It had iron for a core and silicates for a mantle, but it lacked the volatile ingredients of life. No stable liquid water could persist on the surface at that stage. Let's travel back in time to the Hadean Aeon. The title is appropriate and is derived from the Greek underworld, Hades. You wouldn't recognize the Earth if you looked at it 4.5 billion years ago. Continents did not exist. Green was absent. The sea did not exist. The planet's surface was a lava field that radiated heat into the black void of space, a churning, glowing ocean of molten rock. The sky above this magma ocean was not blue. It was likely a hazy, toxic, orange or red, choked with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and vaporized rock. The atmospheric pressure would have been crushing. Water was a physical impossibility in this hellish landscape. Any H2O molecules that came into contact with the surface would have instantly turned into steam and vanished into the upper atmosphere. This was the 0 point of our planet. The complete lack of the liquid that now covers it made it a world of fire. Nevertheless, we can tell that a miraculous event was about to occur by observing this burning sphere. Somehow, this ball of fire had to cool, and the dry rock had to become wet. This scenario is known as the giant impact hypothesis in planetary science. Just as the young Earth began to cool, just as it might have started to form a thin, fragile crust, the universe delivered a blow that reset the clock entirely. This is the giant impact hypothesis. It implies that the Earth was not the only planet in its orbit, approximately 4.5 billion years ago. Another planetary body, a planet the size of Mars, that scientists have named Theia, stalked it. The collision was unavoidable. With an unimaginable force, Theia crashed into the proto-Earth. It was not merely an impact, it was a merger. The planet was totally liquefied by the violence of this event. It blasted trillions of tons of molten rock into orbit, a ring of fire that would eventually coalesce to form our moon. But for the story of water, this moment is critical because it was a sterilization event. The heat generated by the impact was so intense that it would have vaporized any volatile atmosphere the Earth had managed to cling to. They were immediately destroyed if there were puddles, early shallow seas, or even wet rocks. The water molecules vanished forever as they were blasted into the vacuum. The Earth was left completely dry, spinning and wobbling. A bone-dry start was ensured by the reset button. After the violence of the Theia impact, a profound silence fell over the solar system. The moon stabilized its orbit, the debris cleared, and the Earth started the protracted, gradual healing process. The once churning, white-hot magma ocean started to darken. As heat radiated out into space, the surface temperature dropped. On the lava's surface, a skin started to develop. This was the initial crust. It was likely a jagged, black landscape of basalt and obsidian, brittle and unstable, constantly cracking and sinking back into the molten depths below. Imagine a world of black glass under a faint, distant sun. There was still no sound of wind, for there was barely an atmosphere. There was no sound of waves. The only noise was the ticking of cooling rock and the low rumble of the mantle beneath. It was a dry, silent, monochromatic world. By this stage, a solidifying crust existed without a sustained surface hydrosphere. The planet was a parched desert floating in the dark, waiting for a drink that it could not provide for itself. An external or deep interior source of volatiles is therefore required. And about 3.9 billion years ago, the delivery service arrived. The solar system was not the stable clockwork mechanism we see today. The giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn, were migrating, shifting their orbits in a gravitational dance that threw the rest of the system into chaos. Their immense gravity acted like a slingshot, disrupting the orbits of millions of asteroids and comets residing in the cold, outer reaches of the system. These icy rocks were hurled inward, toward the Sun, and directly into the path of the Earth. This era is known as the Late Heavy Bombardment. For an extended interval, impact frequency remained orders of magnitude higher than today. The Earth was hammered by a rain of cosmic debris. These were not small meteors. They were mountain-sized chunks of rock and ice, slamming into the black crust with the force of nuclear arsenals. Looking up from the surface, the night sky would have been a terrifying kaleidoscope of streaks and flashes. This was not a disaster. It was a supply run. These impactors were the carriers, the cosmic freighters, loaded with the one thing Earth lacked. They were bringing the volatile compounds, the frozen gases, and most importantly, the ice that would eventually turn the black planet blue. When scientists first began to look for the source of Earth's water, their eyes turned naturally to the outer solar system. There, drifting in the cold dark beyond Neptune, are the comets. These are the dirty snowballs of the cosmos, ancient remnants from the dawn of the solar system, composed largely of frozen gas, dust, and water ice. They are spectacular carriers. When a comet falls toward the inner solar system, the sun heats it, and it releases a magnificent tail of vapor, a visual proof of the water locked inside. For decades, it was the leading theory that these comets were the architects of our oceans. The hypothesis was initially consistent with available dynamical and chemical constraints. During the late heavy bombardment, millions of these icy bodies would have been flung toward Earth. Each impact would have delivered a massive payload of ice, which would melt instantly upon entry or impact, adding to the growing steam atmosphere of the young planet. For decades, this hypothesis captivated scientists until empirical isotopic results challenged it. The idea that our oceans are essentially melted comets, that the water in our veins fell from the farthest, coldest reaches of the galaxy. It suggested that the Earth was just a dry bucket, filled up over time by a cosmic hose. But science demands evidence, not just elegant theories. To prove that comets filled our oceans, we had to taste them. We had to compare the chemical signature of the water on Earth with the water on a comet. Water is not always just H2O. Sometimes, the hydrogen atom carries an extra neutron, turning it into deuterium, or heavy hydrogen. The ratio of normal water to heavy water acts like a fingerprint. It tells you where the water was made and under what conditions. In 2014, the Rosetta spacecraft performed a miracle of navigation, catching up with Comet 67P after a 10-year chase through the void. It dropped a lander, Philae, onto the icy surface to sniff the water vapor. The results were a shock. The water on the comet was heavy. It had a deuterium ratio 3 times higher than the water in our oceans. It was a mismatch. If our oceans had been delivered by comets like 67P, the chemistry of our world would be fundamentally different. This discovery ruled out the comets as the primary source. The romantic theory collapsed. The dirty snowballs may have added a sprinkle of water here and there, but they did not fill the basin. Attention shifted toward alternative volatile carriers. Something far less obvious. The investigation turned from the icy comets to their drier, rockier cousins, the asteroids. Specifically, a class of ancient space rocks known as carbonaceous chondrites. To the naked eye, these look like ordinary, dull, gray stones. They do not shimmer with ice. They do not have tails. But appearances in space are deceiving. These rocks are like cosmic sponges. Their mineral structure is rich in hydrous clays, minerals that have water molecules locked tightly inside their crystal lattice. They can contain up to 20% water by weight. These asteroids formed closer to the Earth in the asteroid belt, a region that is cold enough for some water to survive, but not cold enough to make pure ice. During the bombardment, it was likely these wet rocks that rained down in the trillions. They didn't bring water as liquid or ice, but as dampness trapped in stone. As they smashed into the Earth, the heat of the impact liberated the water, releasing it as steam. It was not a sudden flood, but a slow, grinding accumulation, meteor by meteor, pebble by pebble. Over geological timescales, Earth's surface oceans accumulated as hydrated minerals, released volatiles upon impact in the form of hydrated dust. One alternative explanation is known as the late veneer hypothesis, in which hydrated minerals delivered water during late accretion. It suggests that the blue of our world is essentially a paint job, a thin, wet coating delivered by rocky freighters that arrived just after the planet had finished forming. For a long time, the story of water was a story of delivery. We assumed the Earth was a dry vessel that had to be filled by an external hand. But in recent years, a new and radical theory has emerged, one that challenges the very idea of a dry birth. What if the water didn't fall from the sky? What if it was already here, hidden from the very beginning? This is the inside job hypothesis. It suggests that the dust grains that originally coalesced to form the Earth were not as dry as we thought. Even in the heat of the inner solar system, water molecules might have clung to dust particles, trapped inside the chemical structure of the rock itself. If this is true, then the Earth was born pregnant with oceans. As the planet formed, as the gravity crushed the dust into rock and the rock into a planet, that water was buried. It was locked away deep in the mantle, in the hot, pressurized rock thousands of miles beneath the surface. The oceans we see today are not an alien coating. They are the sweat of the planet. They are the result of the Earth exhaling the moisture it has held since the moment of its conception. It forces us to look at the ground differently. The solid rock is not a barrier to water. It might be the greatest reservoir of all. This idea sounds impossible. How can solid rock hold water, especially in the crushing heat of the Earth's interior? To prove it, scientists had to recreate the hellish conditions of the mantle. They used a device called a diamond anvil cell. They took tiny samples of mineral, placed them between the tips of 2 gem-quality diamonds, and squeezed. They generated pressures equivalent to being hundreds of kilometers underground, while simultaneously blasting the sample with lasers to simulate the heat. What they found changed geology. Under these extreme conditions, the minerals didn't just crack or melt. They changed their structure. They morphed into new, high-pressure forms that acted like molecular cages. And inside these cages, there was room for hydrogen and oxygen. The experiments proved that rock, under sufficient pressure, acts like a sponge. It can absorb and hold onto water molecules within its crystal lattice. It doesn't look wet. It remains solid stone. But chemically, it is saturated. This discovery opened the door to a hidden world, a potential ocean locked in the stone beneath our feet. The smoking gun for this theory was found inside a diamond that had been vomited up by a volcano from the deep mantle. Inside the diamond was a tiny impurity, a speck of a mineral called ringwoodite. This mineral only forms at depths of around 400 to 600 kilometers in the transition zone between the upper and lower mantle. When scientists analyzed this tiny blue speck, they found that it contained a significant amount of water, about 1.5% of its weight. That sounds small, but the transition zone is vast. If the entire zone is made of this ringwoodite, and if it is all as wet as that sample, then the math is staggering. It implies that there is a reservoir of water deep inside the Earth that is equal to 3 times the volume of all the surface oceans combined. A large fraction of Earth's total water inventory may be stored in deep mantle minerals. The Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, these are just the overflow. They are the puddles on the surface. The true ocean is solid, hot, and buried 400 miles down, locked in a crystal cage of blue mineral. So how did this deep water reach the surface? The engine was heat. The young Earth was a geologically violent place. Its interior was churning with radioactive heat and the residual energy of its formation. This heat drove massive volcanic activity on a scale we can scarcely imagine. Millions of volcanoes, vents, and fissures opened up across the cooling crust. As the molten rock rose from the mantle, the pressure released. The water that had been trapped in the crystal structure of the deep rocks was liberated. It flashed into steam. For millions of years, the volcanoes didn't just spew lava, they spewed gas. They pumped trillions of tons of water vapor, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen into the sky. This was the great outgassing. Atmospheric conditions had reached the threshold required for large-scale condensation and precipitation. The sky turned thick and heavy with clouds. The water was no longer in the rock, but it wasn't yet on the ground. It was suspended above the planet, a global envelope of steam waiting for the moment to fall. The stage was set for the deluge. Before the first drop could fall, the Earth had to wait. It was trapped in a long, suffocating pause. The atmosphere was not the thin, transparent veil we know today. It was a crushing, dense blanket of water vapor, carbon dioxide, and volcanic gases. The pressure at the surface was immense, perhaps hundreds of times greater than it is now. On a planetary scale, it was a pressure cooker. The idea of weather did not exist in this setting. There was only a uniform, blinding whiteness. Miles of superheated fog obscured the sun's diffuse glow, making it invisible. The steam itself created a runaway greenhouse effect that kept the temperature dangerously high. It was a world of suspended animation, a planet holding its breath, waiting for the fever to break. The water was there, billions of tons of it, but it was trapped in the sky, refusing to touch the ground. The Great Deluge was this. The cooling was inevitable, but it was slow. The temperature of the upper atmosphere started to decrease as heat radiated away and escaped into the darkness. It crossed a critical threshold. After millions of years of thermal energy vibrations, the water vapor molecules started to slow down. They clumped together, they shrank. High in the stratosphere, the first clouds formed. The entire world was covered in dark, heavy, bruising storm cells rather than fluffy white clouds. And then it happened. A single drop of water formed a condensation around a volcanic dust particle. It grew heavy enough to overcome the updrafts of the hot air below. It dropped. Surviving the heat, it fell through the kilometers of steam and hit the black, ragged surface of the cooling basalt. It likely did not make a splash. The ground was still too hot. With a loud hiss, the drop would have struck and instantly flashed back into steam. For centuries, this was the cycle. Virga, rain that evaporates before it reaches the ground, a rain of ghosts. However, the rock was losing the fight. A tiny portion of the ground's heat was stolen by each drop that struck and evaporated. Drop by drop, hiss by hiss, the surface cooled. At last, a single drop touched down and remained. It was the beginning of the end for the dry world. Once the cycle began, it did not stop. The Great Deluge was this. It was a storm that is impossible to describe. For days, weeks, or months, there was no rain. According to geological models, it rained non-stop for 10,000 years, or even 1,000,000 years after the atmosphere became unstable. It was a deluge of biblical proportions, but with no one there to witness it. Just picture the sound, day or night, century after century, the unrelenting, deafening roar of water hammering against rock, unabated by silence. There would have been constant lightning, tearing through the steamy, dark sky and illuminating a landscape that was being cleansed. This wasn't soft, clean rainwater. It was hot, and it was acidic. Rain absorbed carbon dioxide and transformed into carbonic acid as it fell through the carbon-rich atmosphere. It dissolved the rocks rather than merely washing them. It removed the minerals and salts from the crust, scouring the valleys and etching the mountains. It was a violent chemical scrubbing, a planetary baptism that washed away the sins of the Hadean Eon. What happened to the water? There were no continents as we know them on this planet. There were no green plains or high mountain ranges to catch the rain. Large, low-lying impact craters from the bombardment and volcanic peaks made up the rough, chaotic surface. The water followed the simple law of gravity. It went downhill. Rivers became streams. Streams became raging torrents of grey, hot sludge. And torrents became rivers. They poured into the large basins that were left behind by the previous impacts. At first, they were just puddles, steaming shallow pools in the bottom of craters. However, the puddles connected, grew deeper, and engulfed the lowlands as the rain continued to fall. The lava fields were submerged, hissing and cooling into pillow basalts under the rising tide. The black rock was gradually and irrevocably obscured by a growing layer of grey. The magma ocean was being replaced by a water ocean, and when the clouds finally broke, when the sun finally pierced the thinning veil of the atmosphere, it shone down not on a red planet, but on a new world, a world of islands scattered across a global, steaming sea. At last, the rain stopped, the clouds parted, and the sun emerged. However, the Earth we know was not the world that was shown below. If you could stand on one of the lonely volcanic peaks poking through the waves 3.5 billion years ago, you would be looking out at an alien sea. Instead of being blue, the ocean was a thick, murky shade of olive green. The dissolved iron content of the water was high. In our modern world, oxygen in the atmosphere reacts with iron to create rust, which settles out of the water. However, free oxygen did not exist on the early Earth. The iron remained dissolved, suspended in the liquid, giving the global ocean a metallic, toxic taste and a deep green hue. The sky above was likely not blue either, but a hazy pinkish orange, colored by high levels of methane and carbon dioxide. It was a landscape of sickly colors, a green ocean under an orange sky, hot, heavy, and utterly hostile to the life that would come later. The water was a global bath that was just below the boiling point, and it was scorching, possibly close to 100 degrees Celsius at the surface. The most striking feature of this early water world was what was missing. Continents did not exist. The Americas, Asia, and Africa had not yet developed into their vast land masses. The lighter granite that makes up the core of our continents floats high on the mantle, but it takes billions of years of tectonic churning to create it and separate it from the heavier basalt. In the Hadean and early Archean eons, this process was just beginning. The Earth was a real water planet. 95, possibly 99% of the planet was covered by a single, uninterrupted global ocean. The only land was made up of chains of black volcanic islands that resembled Iceland or Hawaii today, and spewed ash into the air. The ocean currents were fierce because there were no continents to act as brakes. They circled the equator in unimpeded, superfast loops. a moon that was much closer to Earth than it is now, caused the tides to be extremely strong. Tsunami-sized waves scoured the volcanic islands twice a day, dragging debris back into the green depths. It was a world of violent hydrodynamics, a restless, churning machine of water and stone. Rainwater is fresh. Steam was distilled from the water that fell for 1 million years. What causes the ocean's salinity? It was not the salt that fell from the sky. The rock was the source. Sulfur and carbon dioxide were abundant in the early Earth's atmosphere. Rainfall turned this gas into sulfuric and carbonic acid. The volcanic rocks on the islands were chemically ravaged by this acid rain. The stone's crystal lattice was disrupted, allowing ions, calcium, magnesium, sodium, and chloride to seep out. These minerals were carried down to the sea by rivers after dissolving in rainwater. This is the Great Titration. For billions of years, the rivers have been acting as a conveyor belt, stripping the continents of their salt and dumping it into the ocean. Additionally, the salt becomes trapped once it enters the ocean. The salt remains after the water evaporates to create fresh rain. It focuses. The fresh, acidic flood of the Hadean was transformed into the salty, alkaline brine of today over eons by this gradual, imperceptible chemical weathering. Every cup of seawater contains the dissolved ghost of a mountain that was washed away long ago. The ocean is a liquid fossil of the land, not just water. To find the true purpose of this new global ocean, we must dive. We have to descend into the crushing blackness of the abyss and leave behind the surface that has been ravaged by storms and radiation. Here, we discover a phenomenon that connects the geosphere and the biosphere along the ocean floor's fracture lines, where the magma is near and the crust is thin. These are the hydrothermal vents. They resemble chimneys in the dark, tall spires of mineral deposits, spewing white and black smoke into the water. However, this isn't smoke. It is superheated fluid, water that has seeped down into the crust, touched the magma, and shot back up, loaded with minerals. Fire and water, the two great forces of the planet, meet here. One specific type of vent, known as the Lost City Fields, creates a unique environment. Here, the water is alkaline, warm, and rich in hydrogen gas. Through tiny honeycomb chambers in the rock, it bubbles up. These rock chambers act like tiny test tubes. In this warm, mineral-rich darkness, protected from the chaotic violence of the surface, the water is doing something extraordinary. It's organizing. It is churning the Earth's unprocessed elements until they start to resemble something ordered, serving as a medium for complex chemistry. Water is not a passive stage for life. It is the component that is active. Water served as the all-purpose solvent in the Hadean and Archean seas. It dissolved the minerals from the vents. It captured the carbon-rich dust that fell from the impacts of the asteroids. It took in the gases from the atmosphere that were charged by lightning. It combined all of these disorganized, disparate components to create a worldwide solution. This environment provided a chemically active, aqueous medium suitable for prebiotic reactions. But soup implies a mess. Water does something more than just mix. It structures. Inside the pores of the hydrothermal vents, the water molecules surrounded the organic compounds, protecting them, allowing them to concentrate. It made it possible for the building blocks of proteins, amino acids, to bind together. It made it possible for fatty acids, which are the building blocks of cell membranes, to form bubbles. It was a chemical lottery that took place over eons in the dark, involving billions of trials and errors. These molecules were able to meet, interact, and eventually replicate, thanks to the water's safe harbor, temperature buffer, and transportation network. There was more to the ocean than just water. The womb was a planetary one. Why water? Why isn't life on Earth based on liquid, silicon, ammonia, or methane? The peculiar, sticky physics of the water molecule itself hold the key to the solution. Water is a dipole. Like a tiny magnet, it has a positive and a negative end. Because of this, it can dissolve nearly anything and break down nutrients for transportation. More significantly, though, it makes structure possible. Think about DNA, the spiral ladder that contains life's code. DNA is held together by hydrophobic interactions. The molecule has parts that face outward and love water, and parts that hate it and curl inward. The water surrounding DNA shapes its double helix structure. Without water to push and pull on these molecules, our genetic code would unravel into chaos. Only their interactions with water cause proteins to fold into their functional shapes. At its core, biological function depends on molecular interactions stabilized by liquid water. We are more than just water-drinking animals. We are beings composed of water, arranged by water, and kept alive by the peculiar, unusual physics of this one basic molecule. We weren't born in the ocean. It is still inside us, holding our very cells together. We know water. In our lives, it is the most prevalent substance. But to a chemist, water is a freak. By the strict rules of the periodic table, liquid water should not exist on Earth. H2O is a tiny, light molecule. Based on its weight and structure, it should behave like its chemical cousins, ammonia or methane. It should be a gas at room temperature. On a planet like ours, all the water should have boiled away into vapor or frozen into ice ages ago. There should be no liquid middle ground. But water cheats. It survives as a liquid because of a unique property called hydrogen bonding. The water molecules are sticky. The hydrogen atoms of one molecule are magnetically attracted to the oxygen atoms of its neighbors. They cling to each other with a transient grip, forming a shifting web that holds the molecules together against the urge to fly apart into gas. This invisible web is what gives water its surface tension, allowing insects to walk on it. And it is what allows water to remain liquid over such a vast range of temperatures. Without this molecular stickiness, the oceans would evaporate, our blood would boil, and the Earth would be enveloped in a dry, toxic fog. There is another rule that water breaks, a rule so fundamental that we rarely think about it. In the physical universe, when a substance gets cold, it contracts. Its molecules pack tighter together. It becomes denser, and it gets heavier. Solid rock sinks in molten rock. Solid iron sinks in molten iron. But water does the opposite. As it approaches the freezing point, the molecules arrange themselves into a rigid, hexagonal crystal structure. To fit into this shape, they have to push apart. Ice is less dense than water. It expands. It floats. This physical property is essential for long-term aquatic stability and biological persistence. Imagine if water obeyed the normal laws of physics. Ice would be heavier than water. In winter, the ice forming on the surface of the ocean would sink to the bottom. The dark abyss would fill up with layer after layer of sunken ice, shielded from the sun, never melting. The oceans would freeze from the bottom up, turning into solid blocks of ice that would lock away the planet's water forever. Life would be crushed or frozen out of existence. But because ice floats, it forms a skin on the surface. This skin acts as an insulating blanket, trapping the heat in the water below, keeping the deep ocean liquid and warm enough for life to survive even the harshest ice ages. The third magic trick of water is its relationship with heat. Water has an incredibly high heat capacity. It is stubborn. It takes a massive amount of energy to warm it up. And once it is warm, it refuses to let that heat go. Rock, by comparison, is fickle. In the desert, where there is no water, the temperature can swing from blistering heat at noon to freezing cold at midnight. The rock cooks and then freezes instantly. But the global ocean moderates planetary temperature through large-scale thermal storage and transport. They are a thermal battery. During the day, they absorb the fierce radiation of the sun without boiling. At night, they slowly release that stored heat into the atmosphere, keeping the planet from freezing. Without the oceans to moderate the climate, the Earth would be a world of violent, lethal temperature swings. the equator would be an oven, and the poles would be absolute zero. The currents of the ocean, the Gulf Stream, and the Kuroshio are the plumbing system that moves this heat around, taking warmth from the tropics and delivering it to the north. We live in the comfortable, temperate zone created by this global air conditioning system, unaware that we are being protected from the void by the stubborn thermal memory of water. We tend to think of the ocean as a permanent fixture, a bathtub that stays filled. But the ocean floor is actually a moving conveyor belt. At the bottom of the deepest trenches, like the Mariana, the tectonic plates of the Earth are colliding. One plate slides beneath another, plunging down into the hot, viscous mantle. This is the process of subduction. And as the rock goes down, it takes the ocean with it. The water does not pour down a hole like a drain. It is chemically locked into the crust. The rocks of the seafloor are saturated, hydrated by millions of years of pressure. As these massive slabs of stone descend into the fire of the interior, they carry trillions of tons of water with them, dragging the ocean deep underground. Recent seismic studies suggest that at the Mariana Trench alone, 3 times more water is being swallowed by the Earth than we previously calculated. It is a slow, silent leak. The planet is drinking its own oceans, pulling them back into the deep reservoir from which they likely came billions of years ago. But the Earth is a cycle, not a tomb. What goes down must eventually come up. The water dragged down by the subducting plates does not stay buried forever. As the rock heats up in the mantle, the water is squeezed out. It rises, mixing with molten rock to fuel the explosive volcanoes of the Ring of Fire. But sometimes, it returns in a stranger form. On the floor of the Pacific, there are mountains that do not spew fire. They spew mud. These are the cold seep mud volcanoes, towering structures formed by the eruption of crushed rock and deep pressurized water from the subduction zone. They are the vents of the planet's internal plumbing system. They release fluids that have been trapped underground for eons, water that has cycled through the very heart of the world. This hidden cycle, from rain to ocean to mantle and back to volcano, acts as a long-term regulator. It ensures that while the surface oceans may rise and fall, the planet itself never truly dries out. This deep water does more than just cycle. It performs a function that keeps the Earth alive. Geology tells us that plate tectonics, the shifting of continents, the building of mountains, the recycling of the crust, is unique to Earth in our solar system. Venus is a planet of the same size and composition, yet its surface is a single, locked, stagnant lid. It has no tectonic plates. Why? The answer, again, is water. Water acts as a planetary lubricant. In the deep crust and upper mantle, water molecules soften the rock. They lower the melting point and reduce the friction between the vast plates of stone. Without water, the Earth's crust would be dry, rigid, and seized up. The continents would freeze in place. The recycling of carbon would stop. The volcanoes would die. The planet would become geologically comatose, just like Venus. It is the water slicking the gears of the deep Earth that allows the continents to drift. The very ground we walk on is mobile only because it is floating on a hidden layer of wet rock. Oceanic water enables tectonic mobility by reducing friction and melting thresholds within the lithosphere. To fully appreciate the strange beauty of Earth's open water, we must look at the competition. For a long time, we believed we were the only water world in the solar system. We were wrong. There are other oceans out there, but they are hiding. Orbiting Jupiter is the moon Europa, a ball of fractured white ice. Orbiting Saturn is Enceladus, a tiny, glittering snowball. To the eye, they look dead and frozen. But gravity tells a different story. As these moons orbit their massive gas giant parents, they are squeezed and stretched by immense tidal forces. This friction generates heat deep inside their cores. This internal heat melts the ice from the bottom up. Beneath the miles-thick, rock-hard shell of ice on Europa, there is a liquid saltwater ocean that may be 60 miles deep. It contains more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. but it is a stealth ocean. It exists in eternal darkness, cut off from the sun, the stars, and the atmosphere. It is a sea trapped in a planetary pressure cooker, warm and mineral-rich, but forever sealed away by a roof of ice. This comparison reveals the true anomaly of Earth. In the seems that the default state for liquid water is to be hidden, to be buried beneath a protective crust of rock or ice. Underground oceans might be common, but a surface ocean, a naked ocean like ours, is rare. Our water lies open to the sky. It interacts with the wind to create waves. It evaporates to create rain. It reflects the light of the sun. This openness makes our planet vulnerable. Without the protection of a thick ice shell, our oceans rely entirely on the delicate balance of the atmosphere and the magnetic field to keep them from boiling away into space or freezing solid. We are walking a tightrope. The beauty of the Pacific or the Atlantic lies in their exposure. They are the lungs of the planet, exchanging gases with the air, driving the climate, and creating the chaotic, sunlit environments where complex life could evolve eyes to see the stars. The hidden oceans of Europa may have life, but it is life that will never know the concept of a horizon. The story of water does not end with the geology of the planet. It continues inside you. When life finally crawled out of the ocean onto dry land hundreds of millions of years ago, it faced a crisis. It was leaving the womb. On land, the air is dry and the sun is harsh. To survive, life had to take the ocean with it. It had to internalize the environment it was leaving behind. You are a vessel for this ancient sea. The human body is roughly 60% water, but it is not fresh water. Your blood plasma, your sweat, and your tears are salty. The concentration of salt in your fluids is remarkably similar to the salinity of the primordial oceans where life first began. We never truly left the water. We simply built spacesuits of skin and bone to carry it around with us. Every time your heart beats, it is pumping a chemically modified version of the Archean Sea through your veins. Human biology is not separate from the planetary processes described tonight. The chemistry of our blood, the structure of our cells, and the electrical activity of our nervous system remain shaped by the physical and chemical history of Earth itself. In this sense, human life is a temporary biological expression of long-term planetary evolution, rather than an observer standing outside it. If you zoom in further, past the organs and the tissues, down to the microscopic level of the single cell, you find the same truth. The interior of a cell, the cytoplasm, is a watery gel. It is a microscopic ocean. The machinery of life, the DNA, the proteins, the mitochondria, does not function in a vacuum or in a solid. It floats. These molecules are suspended in water, pushed and pulled by the same thermal currents and chemical properties that govern the tides. The folding of a protein, the precise shape that allows it to do its job, is dictated by how it interacts with water molecules. The transmission of a nerve signal is a flow of ions through a watery channel. In the most literal sense, life is just a complex, organized dance of water. Without the solvent, the dance stops. The dry land we stand on is an illusion. At the cellular level, we are all still swimming. Consider for a moment the water in the glass beside your bed. It looks simple, it looks clear, but every drop has a history that spans the entire age of the solar system. That water was forged in the death throes of a star, frozen in the deep cold of the outer solar nebula, and carried to Earth inside a rocky asteroid during the Great Bombardment. It has cycled through the planet for 4.5 billion years. It has been steam in the Hadean atmosphere. It has been part of a glacier that crushed a continent. It has been swallowed by a dinosaur and transpired by a giant fern. It has been dragged down into the mantle and spewed back out by a volcano. Every drop you drink is part of a multi-billion-year hydrological and geological cycle. It is recycled, purified by the great planetary distillation of evaporation and rain. You are drinking the same molecules that rain down on the cooling crust of the infant Earth. Water participates in and records nearly every major geochemical cycle of the planet. But this story will not last forever. The Earth is a closed system, but it is not perfectly sealed. High in the upper atmosphere, where the air is thin, ultraviolet radiation from the sun breaks water molecules apart. The oxygen stays, but the hydrogen, being light, can escape the pull of gravity. It drifts away into space. This is atmospheric escape. It is a slow, invisible leak. Every second, Earth loses a tiny fraction of its water to the void. Over billions of years, this process will dry the planet out. As the sun ages and grows brighter, the heat will accelerate this loss. The oceans will eventually boil, the atmosphere will be stripped away, and Earth will become a parched, dead rock, much like Mars or Venus. The familiar blue appearance of Earth is a transient phase in planetary evolution, a wet phase in the long, dry life of a planet. We are living in the golden age of water, but that end is far, far away. For now, the cycle holds. The sun heats the ocean, the water rises as a vapor, the clouds form, and the rain falls. It is the heartbeat of the biosphere. Listen to the sound of rain against the window. It is a sound that has been heard on this planet for 4 billion years. It is the sound of the atmosphere cooling the rock. It is the sound of the ocean returning to the land. We are drawn to this sound. We find the noise of waves crashing on the shore, or the steady drum of a rainstorm, deeply, instinctively soothing. Perhaps this is because, in a very real sense, it is the sound of home. Life's biochemistry is shaped by water's solvent properties and molecular structure. Exiles from the ocean, living on dry land, carrying our own internal sea within us. The sound of water reconnects us to our origins, to the time when we were just simple cells floating in the warm, chemical broth of the early Earth. And so, the story of the water's origin is complete. We have traced the journey of the drop, from the burning heart of a comet to the quiet glass beside your bed. The cycle is closed. For many of you, I hope the rhythm of this journey has already done its work. I hope the sound of the eternal rain has carried you into the deep, dreamless drift of sleep. If you are drifting off, let go. You are safe. But perhaps you are still here. Perhaps the silence has not yet taken you. If you are still listening, if your mind is still wandering in the quiet dark, and you are not ready to sleep, I have something else for you. A different kind of story. We have spent this time talking about the water, but we have not spoken about what the water is hiding. There is a mystery that lies not in the fluid, but underneath it. So, if you are still with me, let's stay in the dark a little longer. Let's lower the sea level in our minds and look at the things that the Earth has chosen to forget. Our search for the lost lands begins in the vast, seemingly empty expanse of the South Pacific. If you look at a standard map, you see Australia, and thousands of miles to the east, the islands of New Zealand. Between them lies nothing but blue water. It looks like a void, a blank space on the map of the world. But if you were to strip away that water, if you could pull the plug on the Pacific Ocean, you would see something that defies geography books. New Zealand is not an island chain. It is merely the highest mountain peak of a sunken giant. Beneath the waves lies a sprawling landmass, nearly 2/3 the size of Australia. It has mountains, it has valleys, it has plateaus. It is a distinct, continuous piece of continental crust that broke away from the supercontinent Gondwana 80 million years ago. Scientists call it Zealandia, or in the indigenous Maori language, Te Reu, a Maui. It is the Earth's 8th continent. But unlike the others, Zealandia could not keep its head above water. Its story is a geological tragedy. As it drifted away from Australia and Antarctica, the crust was stretched. It behaved like hot taffy being pulled apart. It became thinner and thinner, and as it thinned, it lost its buoyancy. It became heavy. The underlying mantle could no longer support it. 23 million years ago, the ocean rushed in. The valleys flooded first, then the plains, and finally the hills. 94% of the continent was drowned, disappearing into the blue silence. We must try to imagine the world that was lost. Before it sank, Zealandia was a lush green raft. It was covered in ancient arrow-carrier forests, giant ferns, and unique biological experiments. Because it broke away from Gondwana before the rise of mammals, it became a sanctuary for birds and reptiles. It was a land where dinosaurs might have lingered longer, where the tuatara, a reptile that is the last survivor of a lineage older than the dinosaurs, still walks today on the few peaks that remain above water. When we sail across the Tasman Sea, we are floating over a lost world. We are moving over fossilized forests and ancient riverbeds that have not felt the sun for 20 million years. It is a ghost continent, a sleeping giant that lies just beneath our keel, waiting in the dark. While Zealandia was lost to the deep, silent rhythms of geological time, millions of years before the first eye opened to see it, other lands were lost to human time. To find one of the most poignant and haunting of these drowned worlds, we must travel to the cold, grey, and turbulent waters of the North Sea, the stretch of ocean that currently separates Great Britain from the rest of mainland Europe. Today, this is a rough, inhospitable sea, a place of oil rigs, wind farms, and heavy industrial trawlers. It feels permanent, a barrier of salt and storm. But this barrier is new. Just 8,000 years ago, a blink of an eye in the life of the planet, this sea did not exist. Instead, there was a paradise. This was Doggerland. It was not merely a land bridge, a narrow strip of dirt for crossing. It was a vast, lush, and vibrant subcontinent. It was the true heart of Europe. Imagine a continuous rolling landscape of tundra, wetlands, and rich grasslands that connected the limestone cliffs of England directly to the flat coasts of Denmark and the Netherlands. The Thames did not flow into the sea. It was a tributary, joining the Rhine to form a massive European super-river that wound its way lazily across the plains before emptying into the Atlantic. Great herds of woolly mammoths, reindeer, and wild horses roamed here, grazing on a landscape that is now buried under 50 meters of crushing salt water. It was perhaps the richest hunting ground in the Northern Hemisphere, a place of abundance that supported thousands of our Mesolithic ancestors. We know this not because of myths or legends, but because the sea sometimes gives back what it stole. For centuries, Dutch and English fishermen, dragging their heavy-weighted nets across the bottom of the North Sea, have pulled up things that do not belong in the ocean. They do not just catch fish, they catch the black, fossilized tusks of mammoths. They catch the skulls of woolly rhinos and the antlers of giant Irish elk. And most chillingly, they catch the tools of men. They find harpoons carved from antler, stone axes, and the delicate bones of humans who lived, loved, and died on a land that is now a seabed. These artifacts are debris of a drowned civilization, the tangible, heavy proof that where the waves now roll, there was once the smoke of campfires. The end of Doggerland was a slow-motion apocalypse that lasted for millennia. As the great ice sheets of the last ice age began their final collapse, the global sea levels rose. Year by year, generation by generation, the water crept inward. The Great Plains turned into salt marshes. The marshes turned into tidal flats. The forests died, their roots poisoned by the encroaching salt, leaving behind ghost forests of preserved stumps that can still be seen at extremely low tides on the English coast. The people of Doggerland were refugees of a climate catastrophe, forced to retreat to higher ground, moving slowly toward the hills of what would become Britain and the Netherlands. But the final blow was not slow. It was sudden, violent, and terrifying. Around 6,200 BC, a massive geological trauma occurred off the coast of Norway. A colossal section of the continental shelf collapsed in an event known as the Storegga Slide. This underwater landslide moved an incomprehensible volume of rock and sediment, triggering a mega tsunami. A wall of water, perhaps 20 meters high, raced across the North Sea, It slammed into the low-lying marshy remnants of Doggerland with the force of a bomb. It devastated the coastline, drowning the remaining islands and sweeping away the human settlements in a single afternoon. When the water receded, the land was poisoned, broken, and largely gone. Britain was severed from Europe. The heartland was erased. Doggerland became a memory, preserved only in the mud and the silence of the sea floor, waiting for a fisherman's net to bring its secrets back to the light. Far to the south, in the most desolate and windswept reaches of the Indian Ocean, halfway between Africa, Australia, and Antarctica, lies another sunken titan. This is the Kerguelen Plateau. The small rocky Kerguelen Islands, sometimes referred to as the Desolation Islands, are all that can be seen on a map today. The circumpolar wind's unrelenting fury has battered these desolate, treeless peaks. However, these islands represent only a small portion of the total. They are the summits of a submerged microcontinent that is 3 times the size of Japan. Kerguelen was created by fire, in contrast to Zealandia, which is a piece of ancient continental crust. An enormous mass of volcanic rock, known as an igneous province, was formed by a hotspot located deep within the mantle that erupted continuously for millions of years, creating a new landmass in the midst of the expanding ocean. This plateau wasn't a pitch-black abyss until about 100 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period. The bridge was lush and green. Drilling sediment cores from the underwater plateau reveals an astonishing past. Buried beneath the layers of marine ooze are traces of ancient soil, charcoal, and fossilized pollen. These microscopic clues tell us that this sunken land was once covered in dense forests of ferns and conifers, similar to the temperate rainforests of modern-day New Zealand or Patagonia. It was a green island arc, a stepping stone for dinosaurs and early mammals migrating between India and Antarctica before the continents drifted too far apart. Now it is a silent underwater plain scoured by deep ocean currents, a drowned empire of basalt, where the only inhabitants are deep-sea fish and the ghosts of a forest that drowned eons ago. The tale of the drowned worlds is a prophecy of our own future, not just a piece of history. We tend to think of the world map as a static, completed painting. We draw borders, we build coastal cities, and we pave highways along the shoreline as if the land is permanent. However, geology shows us that the coastline is a moving, ephemeral boundary, rather than a static line. Right now, we are in an interglacial period, which is a short, warm break in the ice. However, as we now know, the cycle of marine transgression, the invasion of the sea, is resuming as the ice melts once more. From a geologist's perspective, the map of the current Earth represents the lost continents of the future. The low-lying limestone peninsula of Florida, the vast river deltas of Bangladesh and the Mekong, the string of coral atolls in the Pacific. These are temporary features. In the deep time of the planet, they are as ephemeral as a sandcastle built at low tide. As the oceans expand, reclaiming the water stored in the ice, these lands will follow the fate of Doggerland. Our cities of glass and steel, currently shining in the sun, will become the underwater ruins of the future, colonized by coral and kelp. The ocean is patient. It has claimed continents in the past, and will do so once more. The water we drink, the water that sustains us, is also the water that waits to consume the land. We construct our civilizations on the edge of the beast in the hopes that it will stay asleep. But earthly history suggests that the beast will eventually awaken. But the water is not the only thing protecting us, nor is it the only thing shifting beneath our feet. High above the atmosphere, extending thousands of miles into the black vacuum of space, there is an invisible, shimmering force field that makes complex life on Earth possible. The magnetosphere is what it is. The violent, churning ocean of molten iron in the planet's outer core is what created this enormous bubble of magnetic energy. By tearing apart the deadly solar wind and obstructing the cosmic radiation that would otherwise destroy our atmosphere, boil our oceans, and sterilize the surface, it serves as a deflector shield. Without this invisible armor, Earth would be a dead, red rock, stripped bare like Mars. We often consider this shield to be unbreakable, consistent, and permanent, but it is not. There is currently a growing hole in the planet's hull and a dent in the armor. Stretching from the coast of Brazil, across the vast expanse of the South Atlantic Ocean and reaching the shores of southern Africa, is a region known as the South Atlantic Anomaly. Here, the Earth's magnetic field is drastically, inexplicably weaker than anywhere else on the globe. It is a ghost zone. In this region, the Van Allen radiation belts, rings of energetic charged particles held in place by the magnetosphere, dip dangerously low, grazing the upper atmosphere. The sky appears normal to the human eye when viewed from a ship's deck. But to the sensitive electronics of our civilization, this region is the Bermuda Triangle of space. When low-orbit satellites pass through this anomaly, they are bombarded by intense, unimpeded cosmic radiation. Computers malfunction and crash. Data is corrupted. The Hubble Space Telescope is actually programmed to shut down its sensitive optical sensors when it flies over this region, to avoid being fried by the glare of the cosmos. We are only now starting to comprehend the physical manifestation of a turbulence deep within the Earth's core, which is causing a widening chasm in our defense. The iron ocean down there is restless, and the storm it is creating is tearing a hole in the sky above our heads. This anomaly is not an isolated event. It is a symptom of a much larger planetary-scale restlessness. We build our navigation systems, our runways, and our maps based on the assumption that north is north. But the magnetic North Pole is not a fixed point. It is a traveler. It drifted like a sluggish barge across the Canadian Arctic for centuries. But in the 1990s, something changed. The pole started to move faster. At a speed of more than 30 miles per year, it is currently racing across the Arctic Ocean, heading towards Siberia and away from Canada. It is traveling so quickly that, in order to keep up with the drift, the World Magnetic Model, the mathematical underpinning of all contemporary navigation, from smartphones to submarines, must be updated in advance. However, this drift pales in comparison to the planet's potential. We learn a horrifying tale from the geological record, which is written in the alignment of magnetic minerals in old lava flows. The poles have flipped, not just moved. The magnetic dynamo has experienced chaos hundreds of times in Earth's history. The dipole, the clear north and south, breaks down. The field weakens to a fraction of its strength, and multiple poles can pop up all over the globe. South turns into north, north becomes south. This is a reversal of the geomagnetic field. The last time this happened was nearly 780,000 years ago, but there were shorter, temporary excursions more recently. The field was only 5% as strong as it is today at the Lechamp event 42,000 years ago. During that time, the shield effectively vanished. Although we are unsure of the precise appearance of a complete reversal from the ground, the models are eerie. It wouldn't be an easy flip. It could take centuries or millennia of magnetic chaos. During this transition, the sky would change. The auroras, currently confined to the poles, would bleed downward, lighting up the night skies at the equator. We would see curtains of neon green and red fire dancing over the pyramids of Egypt and the jungles of the Amazon. It would be a period of extreme vulnerability and terrible beauty. A moment when the invisible walls come down and the Earth is left open to the full, unfiltered fury of the sun. The South Atlantic Anomaly indicates that the machinery for the next major flip is already being prepared by the core. The alien world beneath our feet is largely unknown to us, even as we anxiously watch the shield above our heads weaken. For centuries, biologists operated under the assumption that life was a surface phenomenon. A thin, fragile green skin clinging to the crust, dependent entirely on the energy of the sun. However, a startling reality has emerged in recent decades as a result of deep ocean drilling projects and mines that have penetrated miles into the continental crust. The surface of life is not where it ends. It goes down, deep down. 3 miles below the ocean floor, scientists have extracted core samples of solid basalt rock that has been buried for millions of years and discovered that it is teeming with life. These are not the creatures of the light. The intraterrestrials are these. They are bacteria and archaea, living not in caves or underground lakes, but in the microscopic, fluid-filled pores of the solid rock itself. They inhabit a world of perpetual, oppressive darkness, with temperatures that would boil water on the surface and pressures that would crush a submarine. This is the deep biosphere. This discovery has completely changed the way we think about the Earth. According to estimates, this underground world is so large that it might have more biomass, more living weight, than all of the surface's forests, animals, and people put together. The Earth is more than just a rock that supports life. It is a rock that is alive, permeated with a hidden biological lattice that extends miles into the crust. But the life down there is not like the life up here. Biology appears to be quick. It is a frantic race for energy. A bacterium in a petri dish or a puddle might divide every 20 minutes. But in the deep biosphere, resources are scarce. No sunlight or new organic matter flow is present. These organisms must survive on the faint chemical energy released by the cooling of the Earth, or the slow, radioactive decay of uranium in the surrounding stone. Because energy is so limited, they have evolved to live in extreme slow motion. They are the zombies of the deep rock. Studies of these deep Earth microbes suggest that they do not divide in minutes or days. A single cell might take 100 years, 1,000 years, or perhaps even 10,000 years to divide just once. They hardly notice the difference between life and death, as they exist in a state of metabolic suspension. On a timescale that verges on immortality, they are living statues. They have been imprisoned in their stone cells for millions of years, unaffected by the rise of humanity, the ice ages, or the extinction of the dinosaurs. To them, the chaotic events of the surface are a fleeting ripple. They are the true owners of the planet, the dark matter of biology, waiting patiently in the stone for the world to change. The existence of this rich, hidden past raises a question that verges on science fiction, but it is one that serious climatologists and astrophysicists, rather than conspiracy theorists, ask. The Silurian hypothesis is the name of this thought experiment. It forces us to confront a blind spot in our perception of time. We believe we're the first. When we consider our cities, technology, and global reach, we come to the conclusion that we are the only intelligent species on the planet. However, the age of the Earth is 4.5 billion years. Modern industrial humanity has existed for perhaps 300 years. That ratio is statistically insignificant due to its small size. The hypothesis poses a straightforward but unsettling query. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, long before humans, would we know? If a species of the Triassic, or a species of mammal in the Paleocene, had built cities, burned fuel, and created art, would any physical trace of them remain today to tell us they were here? Our intuition tells us yes. We look at the pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, the skyscrapers of Manhattan, and we feel that these are permanent monuments. We believe we are carving an indelible mark into the face of the planet. But to the Earth, our civilization is nothing more than a temporary texture. The planet is a recycling machine of brutal efficiency. Let us run the simulation. Imagine that humanity vanishes tomorrow. What happens to the physical proof of our existence? We are proud of our engineering, but nature is patient and relentless. Within a few centuries, moisture and oxidation will cause our steel structures to rust and collapse. The concrete, stripped of its reinforcement, will crack and crumble into sand. Within a few thousand years, the roots of the recovering forests will grind our cities into dust and bury them under layers of soil. But the erasure goes deeper than that. The crust of the Earth itself is in motion. Over a timescale of millions of years, the very tectonic plates we stand on will slide, crumple, and melt. The continents will be reshaped. Glaciers will scour the land down to the bedrock, erasing everything that stood upon it. The fossil record which we rely on so heavily is not a complete library. It is a shredded book. We have fossils of dinosaurs, yes, but we only have fossils of a tiny, infinitesimal fraction of the animals that actually lived. The odds of a specific species fossilizing are close to zero. If an advanced civilization lasted for only 10,000 years, the span of our own history so far, and then collapsed, it would appear in the geological record as a layer of sediment no thicker than a sheet of paper. It would be indistinguishable from a natural event. The physical ruins of an empire do not survive deep time. So, if the statues, the buildings, and the machines are ground to dust, what remains? How would we detect a ghost civilization? The scientists behind the Silurian hypothesis suggest that we shouldn't look for objects. We should look for chemistry. We should look for the same signals that we are leaving behind right now. When a civilization burns massive amounts of fossil fuels, it changes the carbon signature of the atmosphere. It releases a specific type of light carbon, carbon-1,2, which is absorbed by the oceans and locked into the sediment. Millions of years from now, geologists will discover this spike in carbon isotopes in the rock. But they won't discover our cars. They will see a sudden, inexplicable fever in the planet's temperature record. A layer of technofossils, odd, artificial molecules like plastics, and persistent synthetic compounds that take eons to decompose will be discovered. They might even find a layer of plutonium-244, a radioactive isotope that does not exist in nature and can only be created by nuclear fission. These are the fingerprints of industry. They are the only things that last. At this point, the hypothesis becomes a mystery rather than a thought experiment. There are anomalies in Earth's geological past. We find events that look suspiciously like our own Anthropocene. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM, is the most well-known. The Earth experienced an abrupt, severe, and swift global warming event approximately 56 million years ago. The temperature spiked, the oceans became acidic, and most importantly, there was a massive, unexplained injection of carbon into the atmosphere. Natural, massive volcanic eruptions, or the release of methane hydrates from the seafloor, are the conventional explanations. And this is probably the case. But the data is messy. The rate at which we are currently burning fossil fuels is strikingly similar to the speed and intensity of the carbon release during the PETM. We are not saying a civilization caused it. However, we learn a humble lesson from the Silurian hypothesis. We are unable to demonstrate that one did not. It implies that civilization may be a cycle rather than a straight line, a persistent fever that the world endures, forgets, and maybe permits to recur. The silence of the rock may not be empty. It may simply be hiding the exhaust fumes of a forgotten empire. However, the Earth is actively speaking rather than merely leaving behind chemical signals. Most of the time, we move through our lives deaf to the planet. We can hear other people's voices, the wind, and the traffic. But there is a phenomenon that has been reported for decades, from the empty deserts of New Mexico to the foggy coastlines of England, suggesting that the Earth itself is making a sound. It is known simply as the hum. It is a steady, low-pitched, deafening drone that happens right at the edge of human hearing. It is described by those who hear it as the vibration of a huge, unseen machine operating deep beneath the Earth, or the sound of a diesel engine idling in a far-off room. It's a sound that doesn't care about walls. Standard microphones are unable to capture the phantom noise that keeps people awake at night, a vibration in their bones. For years, it was dismissed as tinnitus or delusion. But scientists now believe it is real. It's the hum of the planet. It is caused by the relentless energy of the ocean waves crashing against the continental shelves, sending microseismic tremors running through the solid crust. At a frequency so low that it is felt more than heard, the entire planet is vibrating like a bell. It serves as a reminder that the Earth is moving. The energy of the water covering it causes it to tremble all the time. There is another frequency, one that comes not from the ground, but from the air. It is the world's electrical heartbeat. A worldwide electromagnetic cavity is created between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere, which is located miles above. It works just like a musical instrument's body. The planet is struck by hundreds of lightning strikes every second. This atmospheric cavity resonates as a result of these strikes, which function similarly to hammers striking a bell. We refer to this phenomenon as the Schumann resonance. This resonance's fundamental frequency is 7.83 Hz. It is a standing wave that encircles the planet, a constant, invisible rhythm that has existed for as long as the Earth has had an atmosphere. Here's the odd coincidence, though. The human brain's alpha and theta waves, the threshold for sleep, and the states of relaxation and meditation all occur at 7.83 Hz. We evolved in this electrical bath. Our biology is tuned to the frequency of the planet itself. We are not separate from the Earth. Its atmospheric pulse is synchronized with our nervous systems. It alludes to a profound, imperceptible bond that we are only now starting to comprehend, a harmony between the mind and the outside world. As we reach the end of this long journey, the pieces of the puzzle begin to merge into a single, breathtaking image. The water that controls the temperature has been examined. We have examined the air-protecting magnetic shield. We have looked at the deep biosphere that permeates the crust, and the cycles of destruction and rebirth that recycle the surface. When Earth is examined as a whole, it becomes clear that its oceans, atmosphere, geology, and biosphere operate as a single interacting system that continuously stabilizes the conditions for life. This regulation emerges from physical and chemical feedback loops, linking volcanic activity, ocean circulation, atmospheric chemistry, and biological processes into one integrated planetary network. In Earth system science, this is described as a self-regulating planetary system. The first component of this enormous planetary body to open its eyes and become conscious may be our neurons. Human cognition represents one of the many emergent outcomes of this long planetary feedback system. We came here asking where the water came from. We discovered that it is a sculptor of continents, a cosmic traveler, and a survivor of the Hadean fire. However, we discovered ourselves while following the water. The atoms in your body were once part of the asteroid that brought the sea. The ionic composition of human body fluids remains closely aligned with ancient marine chemistry. Your brain's electrical rhythm is like the sky's lightning. On this ship, we are not passengers. The ship is us. We are the temporary shapes that the water and the rock take so that they can walk and breathe and wonder. Earth's history is not something that happened in the past. You are experiencing it at the moment. You are the current chapter of the story. Biological organisms preserve and transmit the long-term outcomes of planetary evolution. And now, the journey is done. The cycle is complete. The water has fallen from the sky, carved the land, and returned to the deep. The Earth hums its steady, low lullaby. The bacteria that are hidden in the stone are waiting. And the Earth hums its steady, low lullaby. At this point, you can simply remain present within the continuous planetary processes that sustain the environment around you. The quiet you hear isn't meaningless. It is brimming with stars, history, and life. The quiet you hear isn't meaningless. It is brimming with stars, history, and life. Allow your breathing and attention to slow in parallel with the steady rhythms of the natural environment. Consider the immense geological timescales that quietly continue beneath everyday experience. This concludes tonight's exploration with Sleep Science Top 1.